Hello, and welcome to the ancient cathedral of cracks and crevices. This is your guided tour. Part 1, Look Up. Observe the faint cracks in the ceilings of your world, mirroring the cracks in the concrete that you strut across with no thought. The above cracks are filled with evaporated honey, its golden stick holding together the sky, dripping down the sides. It escapes, creating gleaming golden rays that spotlight puzzle piece leaves that float on the ends of branches like gifts from an angel. Reach out and touch, and they drift gracefully away. At night, the cracks burst open to reveal that celestial cereal and that milkiest of ways that together make up the meal that is our delicious heavens. I could get lost devouring the sky's late night special. The endless banquet of boundless beauty, the heavens that are so big they make us feel that just by looking at them, we could feast and fill all our cracks. Part 2. Look down. Look down underneath the concrete's cracks, down to the dark, dusty dirt and the mushy mushroom maroon mud that hold the world in place from the ground up. It's so gentle and generous, letting those worms inch through it, cycling out the bad, creating good. The soft earth gives all foliage, all floral, all feelings a chance, a space to put down roots, to dig in deep and to hold on. Don't forget, the ground is grounded in the reality that beyond those roots and ruts and dusty, crusty top layer is heat and fire and filth. It is a feast set aflame that will come and feast on you, gushing out the top when things boil over. The poison, this poison, born in a jagged place, this molten magma will fill up all your cracks until you suffocate. Part 3. Look around. This is the only part I was scared to do. Not knowing what waited for me in the shadows that surround me, all of us, daily, whether we choose to look at them or not. Shadows are much less defined than what's above and what's below. The realm of people, the kingdom of oxygen, the mall of mammal madness is the most unpredictable place, the scariest level to reside and to have to pay attention to. Good happens, bad happens, so much happens. You're expected to make things happen. There are miracles and there are obstacles fighting for a greater existence. Their movement creates cracks in and around the people who inherit this layer. Part 3.5. 3.5. In this middle layer, there is a crack, a specific fracture that I would like to explore. I'm opening it wide. Dive in with me. Once you do, you'll realize you are in a place full of a strange kind of water. Note, the people here do not notice this water. We see narrow halls built out of cinder block and sometimes painted bright colors. It smells weird, like corn. And it's loud. It's full of hot little bodies all moving around quickly, all wearing polyester and plaid, all looking up and staring at the many images of a dead white Jesus hanging on the walls. We have found ourselves inside a Catholic grade school. And outside the confines of this school lies the land of Kentucky, a mysterious place full of fried chicken, bluegrass, moonshine, history, complexity, hate, love, the color red. The year is 2006, and now a story from one of the creatures in this crater. When I was in the 7th grade, my dad had a job that required him to commute both ways, to work and then back home at the end of the day. He also often worked late, and as a result, he wasn't around very much during the week. And I'm Catholic, kind of ish. I don't know. I attended Catholic school. I was raised Catholic, okay? And I attended Catholic school from kindergarten all the way up through high school. And let the record show that I seriously considered Notre Dame, okay? By the time I was in the 7th grade at my Catholic grade school, things had gotten kind of difficult for me. Let me explain. As we all know, on the whole, 7th graders can be really, mean. Yeah. they're all growing and changing and hormones, and everybody loves to talk about hormones, and they're all trying to prove themselves and force everyone they know under penalty of never being invited to another birthday party again to read all of the books in the Twilight series as fast as you can, which is a real thing that happened at my school. Because the school I went to was small, private, Catholic in the South, Kentucky, baby, it was populated by the children of busybodies. A busybody is someone who loves to take their body and put it in your business. And the older busybodies pass on their nosy, rude, judgmental tendencies to their offspring. And then these baby busybodies, full of more emotion than they could ever know what to do with, turn on their own kind and taunt and jeer and question and say things like, yeah, everybody's invited to my pool party except Susan because she just started her period and I don't want blood in my pool. And they say it right in front of Susan. Now, when the BBBs decided to tear their way through my life, it went like this. Where's your dad? Is he even real? Because like I said, my dad worked a lot. He was basically a workaholic, and he really wasn't around much. They'd never really met him. It was this continuous stream of, your dad never comes to basketball games, or he never chaperones field trips, or why has no one ever seen your dad? Mary thinks you made your dad up. Is your dad dead? Or worst of all, are your parents divorced? Divorce. The big D. I tried emphatically to say, no, my parents are not divorced, but people didn't believe me and these questions kept coming. And what's so particularly bad about divorce, about people thinking that my parents were divorced, which they weren't? Well, in the church, divorce, the big D, kind of limits your rights, and it can turn you into a social outcast. If you're Catholic, if you get a divorce, you can no longer receive Holy Communion, aka Jesus's body, which is like the big sacrament in our faith. And so when you go to church and you don't take communion, people might start to whisper about you. They might start to say things. Rumors start to fly. They're questioning things. You can't sit with them in church. And because they see you as someone who broke a sacred covenant blessed by God, they kind of tend to not like you. And that is pretty intense, considering a lot of Catholics get married in their early 20s. Think about a 21-year-old that you know. It could be yourself. I mean, now think about them entering into a sacred eternal covenant blessed by God and Jesus, binding them into another person from now into the rest of eternity. And now think about TikTok. Okay, look, I know there's married people on TikTok, and I like TikTok. People like TikTok, but it's just not adding up, okay? It's not adding up. Also, if you want to be able to receive communion ever again in the church or to get remarried in the church, you technically have to get your first marriage, not just a divorce, you have to get it annulled. Now, annulling a marriage is much more expensive than just divorced. It's more time consuming, and it basically says these people are no longer, not only are they no longer together, they were never together. It makes their marriage null and void, and it can be traumatic. And of course, in the Catholic Church, not only is there this secular legal proceeding that has to happen, there's also this weird religious legal-ish proceeding that has to happen in which your annulment, well, at least in 2006, your annulment had to be approved by the Vatican, aka the Pope himself would have to grant you annulment, which, would take this very painful, already long process and draw it out even further because, to put it mildly, the Pope is busy. He's dealing with a lot of very bad things. So, to avoid the stigma and the limits that accompany divorce and the heartbreak and the time and the money suck that is annulment, a lot of people just stay married, making divorce even more scandalous. Like, oh, they got a divorce and things must have been really, really big time bad. And people see it as a reason to judge and hate you. Really godlike stuff happening here. Okay, so when kids started pestering me with the big D question, it always felt like, there was a different underlying motive. There was that sticky sheen of drama glistening in their eyes. And the thing is, like I said, my parents are not divorced. My dad was just a workaholic. End of story. But there was endless questioning and teasing and a lot of concern from me because as a 12-year-old, I was already a very anxiety-ridden individual, and I didn't know what these kids were going home and telling their parents. And, look, it doesn't matter if you're divorced. It didn't matter to me. It shouldn't have mattered to anybody, but I know that it did. And, people cared, and then they judged and hated you, and really godlike stuff happening here. Finally, my dad hatched an idea. He said, tell him I'm in the witness protection program, and I can only come home on weekends and holidays. That is not what my dad sounds like. But, Tell them I'm in the witness protection program and I can only come home on weekends and holidays and no one will ever bother you again. Now, for those who don't know, the witness protection program, it doesn't work like that. If my dad was in the witness protection program, which you basically only end up in if you witness like the murder of a mob boss or something, I too would be in the witness protection program, as would my whole family. And I wouldn't be here. I would be in Australia living out my Mary Kate and Ashley, Our Lips Are Sealed fantasies, which is a movie about a set of twins that wind up in the witness protection program in Australia. And I'd be away from the prying 7th graders. And I'd be away from the prying 7th graders. But 7th graders are not only mean, they are naive. So when you tell a 7th grader, hey, my dad's in the witness protection program and can only come home on weekends and holidays, they look at you, they blink, they say, really? And you say, yes. And they say, oh. And no one ever bothers you again. Until you're at a party in high school and this girl comes up to you and she says, okay, so my boyfriend Chris, he told me that your dad is in the witness protection program. Is that true? And you say, yes. And she says, oh. And no one ever bothers you again. And you can rest knowing that your plan worked. There was another source of problems, though, looming in the shadows of my weird little guilt-ridden life. My 7th grade math and religion teacher. We shall call him Mr. Quinn. Mr. Quinn and I had a lot of, moments throughout my time as his student, though I don't really know why, because I was an excellent student. For example, on career day, I came to school dressed as a Broadway diva, can you say Streisand, because I sure could, leotard and all, folks. And then he told me that I should want to be a nun, and then chastised me for not wanting to be a nun in front of the entire class. Now, why was I singled out as the person that needed to become a nun? He wasn't a priest. Don't worry. Me and my jazz shoes, we stood our ground, and I said no. And then he basically tried to call the abbey next door to come and have me taken away that day. But anyway, the real thing is that he was a math teacher and he didn't believe that women could do math. One day after class, Mr. Quinn pulled me aside and asked if he could speak with me. Uh-oh, a teacher needing to speak with you is never good. Suddenly, I go stiff. Adrenaline rushes through my adolescent veins while time simultaneously slows to the speed of old molasses dripping out of a jar while my heart begins to pound in my ears. It is important to note that I was an anxiety-ridden perfectionist with a guilt complex who would do all I could to avoid being in trouble. And if Mr. Quinn was pulling me aside after class, the only possible conclusion was I must have blacked out at some point because I don't remember causing any trouble. It's kind of like how anytime my period was late in high school, I automatically assumed it was because I was the new Virgin Mary and God had neglected to tell me and no one would believe me. I didn't even have a Joseph-like figure in my life to even pretend to be the baby's dad, and then I'd have to carry the baby to full term, and then in 33 years that baby would be hung on a cross and die to save us all from our sins, I guess. Anyway, back to Mr. Quinn. Everyone leaves the classroom. I'm alone to face my fate. He looks me dead in the eye and he says, is everything okay at home? Again, it's important to note that I was an anxiety-ridden perfectionist with a guilt complex who wouldn't dare act out in any way at school. Why would he think there was something wrong at home? I did everything I possibly could to please everyone around me. I don't suggest doing that, but that is 12-year-old me's truth. Yes, it's fine, was all I said, all I could say. Well, I asked because I noticed that your parents have different last names, and well, I've never seen your dad. I've never seen your dad around. I stood in silence as time poured out of the molasses jar. Here's the thing. My mom's last name is different than my dad's. She kept it for professional reasons. A lot of women do. It's really no one else's business. There are a lot of people who get divorces. It's really no one else's business. A lot of people work late. A lot of parents aren't around. It's really no one else's business. The world is not a giant courtroom. According to the Bible, no one can judge but God. Judge not lest ye be judged. And if you ask me, God is not actually in the business of judging people, because you see, God in Latin is agape, and agape means unconditional love. Therefore, God is unconditional love, and God's love for you is unconditional. Unconditional. It doesn't matter who you are or the particulars of your circumstances or if you even believe in God. I mean, do I even believe in God? I don't know, but God loves you. God loves you and all of your particulars. And he wants you to stay out of other people's business. okay? It's the church, the man-made institution who judges. And it's the Southern busybodies. And it's people like Mr. Quinn who think they can ask anyone about anything, who think they know things, who think they can also tell anyone anything in the name of God. And they think they can tell people not to loot and riot, never taking into account. They think they can tell people what to do with their bodies in the name of God. And they think they can tell people not to loot and riot, never taking into account the vast suffering that folks experience many times at the hands of religious people, and that it's not your business how people express their anger and their grief and their trauma. Your business is to be in communion with and to protect and love those who suffer the most in this world, those whose society has marginalized. And if you don't believe me, ask Jesus. And if you don't believe Jesus or any of it, whatever, take religion out of it. Take it out. Ask the laws of being a decent human being. You are supposed to be decent to other human beings. But the church, with all of its rules and regulations and doctrines and words and words and words and words until we eat each other, right? Heroes of the Fourth Turning. They make being decent hard. They make loving hard. It might seem like I'm maybe being too harsh, that Mr. Quinn actually really cared. Okay, I had Mr. Quinn as a teacher all year, and I know what he was about. He loved to call girls liars, and he couldn't teach us how to do parabolas. He literally had to take a day off of school while a female teacher came in and taught all of the girls in class how to do parabolas. Also, my entire adolescence was spent around mostly Catholic people, which I'm not saying is necessarily a good thing, but that is 12-year-old me's truth. And I knew what it looked like when someone was judging you in the name of God, or when they were trying to make you feel guilty. There it is. Guilt. The big G. Well, I guess that's God, but the big G. It's one of the church's favorite things. And they love to encapsulate folks in this case of guilt, so we all follow all of these rules that actually ultimately have nothing to do with agape or God. And I know this sounds intense, but think about it this way. I had to start confessing sins as a 6-year-old to a fully grown man who I didn't really know, a priest. And I had to do this on a regular basis. I was constantly told I was a sinner, and I was told it was human nature to want to sin. Therefore, it was easy to do bad things because you didn't really know that they were bad or not. And then you develop this guilt complex. And, the church basically told me, God thinks you are a guilty, girly sinner. Trademark. Deal with it. But here's the thing. Big G is not a helpful emotion. Carrying big G around on your back is not the key to being close to God or to anyone. It's very limited in that it's all about feeling bad. If you've actually done something wrong, big G cannot open your ears to listen. Big G cannot open your mouth to say, I sincerely apologize. Big G cannot reach your hands out to fix the problems. It cannot mobilize you to do better. Big G has no follow through. It cannot help you conspire to protect people. It cannot humble you. It cannot help hold others up, and it cannot stop you from harming again. Guilt takes you hostage and keeps you trapped in a vicious cycle that continually centers the worst parts of yourself without you ever having to do anything about those parts. And big G can be devious. It can be weaponized by others when you haven't done anything to actually be guilty about. Mr. Quinn and some parents and some toxic friends or partners and the people who scream at folks outside of abortion clinics, they knowingly use guilt against innocent people. And they effectively destroy the love that those people may have had for themselves, for others, for God, for anything. And again, some may think there is no way Mr. Quinn wanted to trap you in this vicious cycle. Well, think about it. Think about it this way. Mr. Quinn's questions sought answers that were none of his business. He would then use those answers to confirm his suspicions that my parents were sinners. aka divorcees, which is not a sin, and therefore guilty, and me, guilty by association. And he wanted me to know that he was watching, therefore the church was watching and paying attention to all of my supposed transgressions and the transgressors in my life. He wanted to set me down the path of becoming a judge and a hypocrite so that he, a judge and a hypocrite, could pass on his own feelings of guilt. And he wanted me to continue to swim in the waters that filled every inch of every crevice in this crack. Yes, I realized Big G was the strange, ever-present water that had always surrounded me, and I was being sucked down to its depths. And eventually I would suck others down with me. And how do you save yourself from that riptide? Well, if you've done something wrong, and I feel like I'm about to do a Sarah McLachlan PSA here, but if you've done something wrong, recognize that you've done something wrong. And then do what you can to fix it. And do what you can to do better in the future. But if you haven't done something wrong, if someone's trying to make you feel guilty just for being you, or just for existing, or for something that you shouldn't feel guilty about, well, this is what I did. Well, I ask because I noticed that your parents have different last names, and well, I've never seen your dad around. 2 seconds of silence, then without wavering, I simply said, yes, my parents have 2 different last names, and my dad is not around because my dad is in the witness protection program and can only come home on weekends and holidays. He looked at me. He blinked. He said, really? And I replied, yes. He nodded, said, oh. And he never bothered me again. And eventually, time pushed me out of this crack. The waters of guilt pushed through and followed, as they always do. And as I traversed into deeper fissures harder to navigate, guilt was there. But I know how to swim. And I know that it's important to remember to look around.